Governments love to sell the idea that they're working for your financial freedom. They talk about stability, prosperity, opportunities, basically that everything is under control. But if you dig a little deeper into history, a much darker story starts to emerge. Time and again, governments have used hidden financial maneuvers to keep ordinary people struggling, while channeling wealth and power toward themselves. And here's the kicker. None of these tricks are new. They've been around for centuries, sometimes disguised, sometimes repackaged, but the goal has always been the same: shifting wealth upward and keeping the majority dependent. Let's start with the oldest trick in the book: inflation. When a government spends more than it collects in taxes, it's faced with two choices. One, it could be honest and tax its people directly, which is politically dangerous. Or two, it can quietly devalue the money everyone holds, eroding the purchasing power of coins and bills without anyone noticing immediately. Ancient Rome was a master at this. The 3rd century AD, emperors burdened with military expenses started cutting the silver content in their coins, the denarius. Coins that once gleamed with near pure silver ended up mostly copper, with just a thin layer of silver on top. The empire acted like nothing had changed, but every citizen holding those coins silently paid the cost. Prices soared, savings disappeared, and wages couldn't keep up. It was a stealth tax on the people, and guess what? Governments still use this same trick today, only now it's central banks doing the debasing, not imperial mints. Fast forward a few centuries, and the game evolved into forced loans. During the Middle Ages, monarchs in England, France, and Spain leaned heavily on wealthy merchants and guilds to lend money to the crown. There was no real choice. Refusal could mean fines, confiscation, or worse. Sometimes the crown promised repayment with interest, but often it came late, in currency that had lost value, or not at all. The monarchy could fund wars and build palaces while merchants had no real say. The trick was presenting coercion as patriotism or civic duty, and it worked for generations. By the 17th century, the system itself became part of the game. The founding of the Bank of England in 1694 wasn't an act of generosity. It was a solution for the government to finance wars with France. Wealthy investors bought government bonds, and the crown promised interest payments funded by taxes. On paper, it sounded fair. But who paid those taxes? Ordinary citizens through duties on everyday goods like salt, beer, and cloth. The wealthy lent money to the state and earned a safe, steady return. The poor financed it all. It was a wealth transfer wrapped in the language of national finance. And this pattern persists even today. Lending to governments is still considered the safest investment, guaranteed by the labor and consumption of the majority. Jump to the present, and these tricks are everywhere. Take deficit spending. Governments borrow staggering sums, issuing bonds bought by investors, banks, and foreign powers. Politicians frame it as funding roads, jobs, or social programs. But in reality, much of the money flows to defense contractors, corporate handouts, and bailouts. When the debt has to be repaid, governments don't trim the top-heavy spending. Instead, they raise taxes, inflate the currency, or cut social programs. The trick? It looks like the debt benefits the people, but in reality, it lands squarely on their shoulders while the wealth flows upward. Bailouts are another perfect example. In 2008, banks made reckless bets, bundled toxic mortgages, and almost collapsed the global financial system. Who footed the bill? Ordinary taxpayers through massive government bailouts. And who came out on top? The banks themselves, often bigger and more powerful than before. The method is clear. Privatize profits, socialize losses. The public was told it was essential to save the system. Even retirement and pension systems are part of the illusion. In countries like the US, Britain, and across Europe, people have been contributing to government-managed funds, trusting that the money will be there when they retire. But governments rarely save this money. They spend it immediately and leave IOUs. The promise is that future taxpayers will cover the costs. Essentially, it's a generational Ponzi scheme dressed in official jargon. It works until populations age and the system can't sustain itself. Then the government reforms it, usually by cutting benefits, raising retirement ages, or letting inflation erode payouts. Notice the pattern. Each trick depends on perception. Inflation is labeled as growth, forced loans as duty, national debt as investment, bailouts as stability, and pension reductions as reform. Language hides the truth. Wealth is being transferred from the many to the few, from bottom to top. History proves this method works, because most people don't study economic history, don't understand financial systems, and only see the trap after it's too late. Modern tricks are even more sophisticated. Quantitative easing is a prime example. Before the 2008 crisis, most people had never even heard the term. Central banks created trillions of dollars out of thin air, buying government bonds and mortgage-backed securities to stabilize markets. Politicians and bankers assured everyone it was essential to prevent collapse. And it worked for the financial system. Asset prices soared. Stocks, real estate, and bonds surged. But who actually owned these assets? The wealthy. For average households without big investments, the benefits were minimal, while the downside came as distorted markets and rising costs. The trick here? Money creation saved the top while fueling inequality and inflation for everyone else. Another modern sleight of hand is stealth taxation. Instead of raising income taxes directly, governments quietly tax through sales taxes, fuel levies, and, most importantly, inflation. When prices climb faster than wages, that gap is essentially a hidden tax on savings and purchasing power. Governments love this because it shrinks the real value of their debts. Citizens, however, lose financial freedom. Your paycheck may rise nominally, but if living costs outpace it, your wealth erodes. This isn't a flaw, it's how the system works. Regulatory capture is another method. Regulation should protect citizens. Financial rules, safety measures, consumer protections. But history shows us time and again that industries bend the rules in their favor. Railroads in the 19th century, oil companies in the 20th, tech and finance today. They all influence the very people supposed to regulate them. The public sees protection, insiders see profit. War finance is an ancient trick that keeps reappearing. During World War I and II, governments issued massive bonds, framing it as patriotic duty to buy them. Citizens thought they were supporting their nations, and they were. But these bonds were also safe, lucrative investments for the wealthy, backed by future taxes. The same pattern persists in the 21st century. Wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, funded through debt, enriched defense contractors, banks, and bondholders while ordinary taxpayers bore the financial weight. Wars are presented as temporary emergencies, yet the costs last generations. Governments also weaponize complexity itself. Tax codes thousands of pages long. Financial instruments so convoluted even experts struggle to explain them. Budgets filled with hidden line items. All this ensures ordinary citizens cannot track where money flows. Complexity is camouflage. If you can't see the transfer of wealth, you can't fight it. In ancient Rome, debased coins were visible. Today, it's balance sheets buried under acronyms and obscure programs. The principle is the same. Hide the flow and the transfer goes unnoticed. Why does this matter today? Because these tricks are alive, evolving, and accelerating. Inflation eats your savings. Debt piles up year after year. Bailouts remain the default whenever markets wobble. Central banks manipulate money supply while governments push costs onto the public in ways most people never notice. The result? A system that forces you to work harder for less while the financial elite gains strength. History teaches that these tricks always return. Rome debased coins, citizens suffered. Monarchs forced loans, merchants lost fortunes. Modern states inflate and borrow. Households carry the weight. Different eras, same mechanism. And here's the bitter truth. Most people will never escape because they don't even realize they're being manipulated. Inflation feels natural. Taxes feel inevitable. Bailouts appear merciful. People trust government messaging over economic history. And that ignorance is the most powerful trick of all. When people forget the past, they cannot recognize its repetition. That's why governments and elites prefer an uneducated public. Financial education is resistance. Economic history is a weapon. The more you understand the tricks, the harder it is to manipulate you. So what should you take away? Always look beyond the headlines. When stimulus is announced, ask who profits first. When inflation rises, remember it's not luck, it's policy. When regulations appear, question who wrote them and who benefits. Build real wealth outside these traps. Assets that retain value even when money loses it. And never assume the system works for you just because it says it does. Systems exist to protect themselves, not you. History doesn't repeat exactly, but if you ignore it, it will crush you all the same. The tricks that drained Roman citizens' wealth are the same ones emptying your bank account today, only dressed in modern language. The only difference is whether you notice in time. If this opened your eyes even a little, hit subscribe. History has the answers, and I'll show you where to find them.